Hi, my name is Karen Fabian and I'm the founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and I want to welcome you to video number 7 of the Bare Bones Yoga Learn Yoga Challenge. It's been so much fun creating these videos and I'm getting so many really interesting emails from people. I got an email yesterday from someone who commented on the instruction I gave in Eagle Pose, and she said that practicing these videos has really helped her change the way she practices. And I think, sometimes we kind of can get into a little bit of a pattern when it comes to how we move on the mat. And a lot of that can come from how we hold our bodies all day. And if we're really not informed about the anatomy behind the practice, it can be difficult to sometimes recognize that some of the movements we're doing might not be the most consistent with moving in a healthy way. And of course, we would never intentionally do anything to hurt our bodies or to do something that forces us into an uncomfortable position. But one of the things that I've learned over the years of teaching is that many of my students really never learned how to do the poses in any kind of one-on-one way. Many people go to yoga classes, absorb information from a whole bunch of different teachers in whatever way it's presented, and really are left with making a lot of assumptions about how the poses are structured. And so what I really hoped to do in this challenge is break down a lot of the poses from the perspective of anatomy and alignment. And so from there, you can factor that information into how you're currently moving on the mat. If you're a new student, you can use this information to inform you as you go into any yoga class at any point in time. And so I'm really super psyched when I get emails like that, because it really shows a willingness to continue to learn in someone who has been practicing for a while. And that can sometimes get harder and harder to do the longer that we have been practicing yoga. So thank you so much for that. And remember, everyone that comments on the video will be entered to win a book, a free book, of my latest book called Structure and Spirit. And I refer to this throughout several of the videos. The themes in this book are both based on anatomy and spirit, and certainly the anatomical themes apply to what we're covering here in these videos. I want to be sure that I touch on some of the tips that I have in the PDF. If you haven't downloaded the PDF instruction sheet that goes with the challenge, I'll include the link to it here in the video. But one of the things I want to address is just these ideas of, the first one is being patient. Growth on the mat may sometimes feel like it's going at a really slow pace, but the practice really is that. It is about the practice. So having a consistent time that you get on the mat every week can be really, really helpful. And I know that one of the challenges we all face is not having enough time. So I want to kind of give you this idea that the more frequently you can do some of these movements, even if the duration is not that long, the better. So for instance, if you can get on the mat 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 3 to 4 times a week, that is, in my opinion, actually better than once or twice a week for 90 minutes. Because what you're really doing is using frequency to start to create a little more balance in the body and undo some of the things that build up throughout the day. So if you really can only afford about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe 4 or 5 times a week, that would be ideal. Try to connect it to something that you do if you're out and about, coming home, before bed, when you first get up in the morning. If you do have a favorite yoga class in a convenient studio, try to get there at least twice a week. I think that, at a minimum, peppered with a couple of 15 to 20 minute sessions on your own at the gym or at home, can really, really help balance the body out again. This other idea is to integrate other exercise with your yoga practice, or maintain the exercise regimen that you have already and pepper in some yoga as well. I know for myself, when I started practicing yoga 16, 17 years ago, I stopped everything else. And I really did that for a number of years. And it's really only been within the past, maybe 5 or 6 years that I've gotten back into balancing my yoga practice with running and going to the gym. And I really think that that's important. Even though yoga practice is multi-planar, meaning we're moving in multiple planes, we're really putting the joints through a full range of motion in all planes of movement, rather than things like running, where we're just kind of moving in this front to back plane, the sagittal plane, or side to side plane. It is really helpful to have some balancing actions involved. So if you think about how much pushing there is in yoga, and then going to the gym and doing something like the lat pull down, there's a perfect example of something where, or maybe even on the rowing machine, doing the rowing machine itself, there was a lot of pulling there. So having that balance, in yoga practice we don't do a lot of pulling. Just the actions of being on a treadmill or being on an elliptical machine or lifting free weights and the proprioceptive skills that that requires, the coordination that that requires. It's very different than what we get when we're on the mat. So I highly encourage you, as excited as you are about your yoga practice, which is super natural and a very common feeling, especially if you're new, to keep up with what you're doing and factor your yoga into your schedule so that you have a balanced exercise approach. And if you're using the Yoga Challenge to learn yoga for the first time, use the videos and the online classes to build familiarity. And then, of course, look for a local yoga studio that you can go to and apply all this on the mat in the studio setting. And that's really what my intention was in providing these videos, is that you'll use this breakdown to educate yourself, download some of my online classes on the online classes page, and apply the learning to practicing in this style, the way I teach, and then taking that information on the road to classes that you might go to in studios or gyms near where you live. So that's the update, little overview there. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. So this is video number 7. We've got locust, bow, bridge, and wheel to cover. So these are back bends. And so we're really talking about, from an anatomical perspective, we're talking about spinal extension versus spinal flexion. So we're working through movements of the spine. And you know, a lot of what we talked about in earlier videos is that so much of our resting position is hunched over, internally rotated. So you can imagine, if that's where most of us are all day, this idea of moving backwards, right, and opening the front line of the body is going to be really hard. And that's going to be hard whether we're on our belly and lifting up, or we're on our back and moving up and back. And so that's why, you know, as a teacher, we need to have an appreciation for this particular movement being really, really far off from what we're doing a lot of during the day, and look for ways to cue and to allow modifications to really help people access these postures. So let's come down. I'm going to come down onto the floor and set up for locust pose. So as you come down onto the belly, there's a couple variations, but let's take the standard one where the arms are by the side. So you'll notice here my palms face down and the shoulders are externally rotated. I'm not letting them dump down. And with a good amount of push off, I'm going to lift the chest, lift the toes, lift the arms. Now it's a really long shape. It's not super high, and I'm not trying to bend as much through my cervical spine as much as I am trying to lift my shoulders up. So if you notice that you're lifting your gaze point a lot, I would say drop it slightly, but do try to lift from the front of the shoulders. The legs are really active, the feet are separated to hip width distance, toes are pointed, inner thighs rolling up. So this is a really, really strong position. It's similar to upward dog in that it is spinal extension, but it has that low shape with just a mild lift. So again, important to watch as you're practicing, as you're teaching, how much cervical extension is happening, and just kind of moderate that a little bit, because again, what we're really trying to do is open up these internal rotators of the shoulder, so we want to get more of the shoulders lifted rather than hyperextending the neck. The cervical spine is pretty mobile on its own. You can see how the bones are a lot smaller, so there's a lot more movement here. and a lot easier to move. And just think in your activities of daily living, how many times you're turning your head versus moving from the middle part or the thoracic spine. So it's very common for us to have a lot of flexibility in the neck. So let's come down and let's look at bow pose. So if we take locust and we bend the legs and we reach back and take the feet, we can start to press back and lift up. Now sometimes as people do this lift, they feel some compression through the lower back. So just to reference here, we're talking about compression through the sacroiliac joint, which is the connection between the sacrum and the pelvis. And oftentimes, the source of this pressure or discomfort or pain is because the knees are taken too wide. So if you see that this is happening in your students, that the knees are widening, suggest that they keep the knees about hip width rather than taking the knees out. Now, one of the things I want you to notice here is the position of the hips as I lift is extension. So I'm not flexing the hip as I am here. I'm extending the hip. Now, we talked earlier about the major hip extender is gluteus maximus. So it's the big muscle on the back of the hip, right? So it's pretty much like this. It's the outermost muscle versus the glute medius and minimus. And it's very powerful in extending the hip and in bow, helping us take that hip extension to a deeper degree. But it also is an external rotator, so it will potentially turn the knees out. So that's why it's helpful when people do come into bridge to keep kind of fighting the urge of the glutes to open the knees and to keep the knees hip width and use the powerful action of the glutes to extend the hip. So that's your back bends on the belly. So let's look at the back bends on the back. And again, just referencing here, in the Bare Bones Yoga Guide to Anatomy, there are pictures of all the poses, including one for bridge, and just to kind of break down some of the key muscles in action. So we're talking about rhomboids from a shoulder perspective, I'll speak to that. Glute maximus, extending the hips. So let's take a look. As we come down onto the back, setting the feet down flat, arms by the sides, right? So we're going to use the powerful glute max and the hamstrings to lift the hips up. So now we're moving into hip extension. And then the rhomboids, if you remember, are squeezing the shoulder blades together here. Rather than the shoulder blades moving apart, elevating the shoulder blades, that would be the trapezius. We're using the rhomboids to squeeze them together. Okay, now similar to what we said in bow, it's really easy here for the feet to turn out. So this is sometimes why teachers suggest a block between the thighs. It fights the urge for the knees to turn out, keeps the hips a little more neutral, and allows us to take advantage of the power of the glutes without opening the feet. Another suggestion I like to do is to put the block actually between the feet and to tell people to just keep a little bit of pressure against that block as you come up into the pose. And that's going to remind you that your feet are neutral, parallel, and you're not turning them out. This only gets more challenging as we take it up into wheel. So we want to keep the feet hip width. We want to still push off the legs versus pushing off the wrists. It's going to be a lot harder for me to push off here versus here. So as I keep the elbows hugged in and I push off my legs, I can get up into the posture. Now, one thing to think about here, it's a little difficult if you're in a studio and all they have is cork blocks because they are a little heavy. But if you can encourage people to start out at least with a block hugged in between their thighs, that will prevent the feet from turning out. And again, the same suggestion of putting it between the feet works as well. Just remembering, of course, that As you come up into wheel, even more so than bridge, if the feet turn out, people are going to potentially feel a lot of compression here, and it's just going to get in the way of the upward movement of the pose. The other thing to keep in mind is the position of the arms is the same as your low push-up. So just as you don't want the elbows to go out when you move into chaturanga, you don't want the elbows to go out here either. Because as soon as the elbows go out, the upper trapezius takes over, the scapula elevate, and then someone is trying to come up into the posture and their shoulders are elevated up, towards their ears. So really helpful to, build that good alignment when we're moving from high to low push-up, because then when we do the flip side, it's the same action. Another pose I'll just kind of spontaneously throw in here, which is a back bend, is camel. And so something like this can be a lot more forgiving because we're not locked down to the floor through our hands. But it's asking us to take the same action. It's asking for the spine to extend. It's asking for the knees to stay hip width, pushing off using the glutes, right? So this can be a really nice alternate pose instead of wheel. So if people are looking for something to do instead that has very similar benefits, camel is another good posture you could use instead. So that wraps up video number 7. We're going to conclude the series with video 8, plus a bonus video that I'm going to do about foam rolling, so stay tuned to that. I want to remind you that the anatomy guide is $65, but everyone watching this video is eligible to get it for $50. And my latest book, Structure and Spirit, is $31.99 on Amazon, but you get it for $26.99. And to get either or both of these, just send me an email, Karen@barebonesyoga.com. If you have any questions or you want to download any of the free content, the worksheets, or watch webinars on the website, or please download at least one of the online classes on the online classes page. You can also link to it directly from the PDF, and that's going to be your opportunity to pull all of this together into a class sequence. So each video I have up there is just about an hour in length, so it's the perfect thing to do at home, especially if you can't make it to class. The website is barebonesyoga.com. I thank you so much for your participation, your comments. Keep them coming, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Namaste.